Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. This is the 101st episode of Veeam's Industry Insights. And the original vision of Industry Insights was to take data, not only that Veeam might have curated, but from outside sources, and really just comment on that. As always, my partner in crime, Dave Russell, is here. But Dave has a unique view on this particular data that we should kind of dig into. Dave, I know you're usually pretty humble about this, but let's talk about your view on the Magic Quadrant.
Well, as far as I know, and I have the therapy bills to back this up, I'm the only person that's been involved in the Magic Quadrant for all 22 years, now 23 years of its existence. See, I've tried to block out some of that. Going back to 1999, either from the vendor side or 13 years as the lead analyst, and then now, of course, 4 years here at Veeam. And now here we are again, Jason. We've done a couple of these. This is yet another recap on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, where we hope to be able to offer some unique perspective.
Fantastic. For many years, you and I were on similar paths, and I was always wondering, how does the Magic Quadrant come together? Can you talk us through a little bit of the process of what goes into this pretty four squares that all the vendors want to covet dots on?
Yeah, and want to give a quick shout out. Be sure and tell us where you're tuning in from, or if you have any comments, questions. We are quadcasting now. We're on 4 different platforms. I'm in Colorado. Jason's in Texas. Our producer's in Georgia in the United States. And we have amazing social media production assistants from Romania. Shout out to our production teams there. Thank you, thank you. But yeah, give us a comment where you're tuning in from, and we'll look back on the map a little bit. The first thing I'd say, and then we can look into some specifics, Jason, is it's a lot more complex than I think many people appreciate. One of the things I really want to dispel right off the bat, because you and I, we like to do some myth busting,
Yep.
when we're talking through things. Sometimes there's a feeling of, well, the Magic Quadrant's really all about market share. And that wasn't true before my time. It wasn't true when I was the lead author. It's still not true today. And we're going to prove it in just a little bit. But the notion is, what is a Magic Quadrant? First and foremost, it's to evaluate a vendor in a given position of a specified market. So it's not about product alone, although product plays a huge role. It is not about vendor revenue alone, or it would be called a market share, not a Magic Quadrant. And since we did say Magic Quadrant, we tried to make it very subtle, but we created a QR code for you here you can click on. And obviously there's the link below it, VEE.am/MQ22, just means Magic Quadrant 2022. We'll come back to that, but be sure and click on that. Gartner has told us that we've been now at Veeam driving for over half a decade, the most number of downloads from this report. You don't have to be a Veeam customer, of course. Just like all of our research, Jason, it's been very independent. In this context as well, we like to say you owe it to yourself to go get educated and to make your decisions from a better informed position.
Yeah, I cannot emphasize enough that the report from Gartner is much more than these 4 boxes, right? So you get a little bit more of the process. You do get to find out a little bit about what Gartner thinks about each and every one of those dots, how they got there, what they like, what they have some concerns on. We're actually going to talk about some of that. I guess now can we talk through some of the elements that kind of show up in this? And again, I want to emphasize what Dave said. This is not about a product, and it's not about market share. In fact, Gartner actually does report how they track market share. That's a different report than this one. So, but let's talk about, what did Gartner say about us? Let's talk about the elephant in the room. What is Gartner's view on Veeam?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're really proud of, besides being in the leader's position for the last 6 years, is being highest in ability to execute. I'll look over my presentation monitor. That's the y-axis here. And you can see Veeam highest in ability to execute. Now going on 3 years in a row. I think I may have mentioned this last year, Jason, but fun bit of trivia, and Veeam is the answer. The reason it's called a magic quadrant is that Gideon Gartner, so there really was someone with the last name Gartner, when the magic quadrant methodology was put in place, the view was that the most typical progression from vendors, if they could ever get into the leaders quadrants, would essentially look like a backwards Z. They would most typically come into the niche quadrant here,
Yep.
work on the product, get into visionary because they're doing something kind of interesting, kind of a better mousetrap is the phrase often used.
Yep.
Then as they try to scale the business, partnerships and support and alliances, they might come up to the challengers quadrant. And if they could actually do multiple things extremely well, they would get into the leaders quadrant. The magic would be if you could get into the leaders quadrant without having to traverse the other three. And not just in this magic quadrant, meaning this backup and recovery solutions magic quadrant, but in every single storage magic quadrant, primary arrays, virtual tape systems, deduplicating appliances, archiving solutions, you name it. Veeam was the first vendor to achieve the magic. Veeam first appeared on the magic quadrant in the visionary box and then kept moving up and up and up and went to leaders. So Veeam achieved the magic faster or first compared to any other magic quadrant. Now, you asked sort of, how does this get built? And most people just look at the box on the left, right? And there, to your point, there's a whole report that goes behind this, meaning a lot of text, and we'll show you Veeam's text, the good and the bad. And the bad, we're going to argue we don't know if we really think it's that bad, but we'll talk through that. But over on the right are actually the characteristics, the criteria that make up the x-axis, the completeness of vision, and the y-axis going up and down, the ability to execute. So what we're looking at here is the default rankings. That's in blue. And so by default, on ability to execute, most of these things are high, and the specifics are the product, viability of the vendor, sales execution pricing, your market responsiveness or track record to delivering. You can see marketing execution zeroed out. It's really all the way down, and then customer experience all the way up. Now, if we switch to the vision axis, market understanding is rated high, and then a whole lot of things. The last about 3 years, Gartner's been reducing a number of these that you can see here that used to be higher. Marketing strategy, sales strategy, business model, vertical industry strategy, geographic strategy. But instead, what's weighted high? Market understanding, the product, and innovation.
Hey, Dave. So, just to give folks context, how did Gartner get to this point in the thing? So the Magic Quadrant pops out the 1st of August, but this was a multi-month process. Gartner, I mean, this is a collaboration of diligence between Gartner investigating each of these levers, right? So they investigate each of these elements, then they put a score on it, and then you decide how much of each is a weight. Is that a fair way to generalize that?
Yeah, good point. And before we hit the map, let's back up from that, because if you can see kind of the fine print here, it says as of June 22nd, and it publishes about a month later. But to your point, what goes into this, actually, there's a large survey or questionnaire that needs to get filled out. There are multiple briefings and discussions and demos and customer references. All of this from a product perspective has to be generally available by the end of March. So what's transpired is many months from we get this activity commences typically end of January to the beginning of February. Then we've got product cutoff at the end of March. The evaluation's complete in July. In June. They publish in July. So a whole lot of activity takes place in between there. But before I go on too far, should we take a look at the map, Jason?
Yeah, let's find out. Where are folks calling in from today? Hey, Canada's in the house. All right. So what do we got? So we got Canada. I love it when Canada chimes in early because that means the whole world starts looking more green. We also got Ohio's in the house. California. Looks like New Jersey. I'm not wearing my glasses today. Florida, always good there. Mexico. So our neighbors to the north and the south.
Yeah.
Feeling very green. Very nice. Let's see, over in Europe, we got the Netherlands in Montenegro.
Hmm.
Um, as
Azerbaijan, that might be a new one, Jason.
That might be a new one. So that's awesome. Czech Republic's in the house, France, Slovakia. Let's see, let's go a little bit further. My friends in South Africa are in. Good evening to them, and Nigeria and Dubai. It's been a while since we've seen Dubai on the roster. That's always good to hear. So yeah, so please keep letting us know where you're coming from. Let's turn the world green, one sovereign boundary at a time. Oh, and actually, just as the screen was flipping over, looks like UK and Peru both popped in as well. So yeah, so please keep piling in from that. Okay, so for several months, folks, Gartner talking with each of the vendors, filling in surveys, demos, all of those pieces and parts. They do a score. The score is showing this, and then from there, then they figure out what the weighting should look like for the year.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And so what we see here is the default weighting, meaning this is the published version. It's all in blue. This actually was the first Magic Quadrant in the history of Gartner to be an interactive Magic Quadrant, meaning if you are a Gartner seat holder or have a Gartner account, you can actually go and change these sliders. So let's say you're from the procurement department, you might really be wanting to hone in on, well, how is this vendor to do business with from a sales perspective?
Sure.
If you're an administrator, you might be thinking, I just care about the product and support, zero everything else out. So before we even get to that, I want to give you a little bit of history. You can also, if you're a Gartner seat holder, go and look at the history, and you can even select, I want to see certain vendors, not see certain vendors. So there's a history tab where you can see the prior two publications, 2020, 2021. If you see here, this is an unnamed vendor. That's because they no longer participate in the market. I will tell you that happens to be Actifio. And then obviously some new vendors come in, meaning last year Zerto was added, Druva was added. This year Haiku was added as just one data point there. And another one I should mention, HPE's former product that got sold off to Micro Focus for one period of time. They were off of the Magic Quadrant. Then we were reintroduced in 2021, and they continue on in this time frame as well. Now, this fine print, I included it for a very specific reason, Jason, because there are valid reasons why things change year over year, because the criteria and the market changes year over year. So Gartner responds to that. But here's the one where I just want to jump right in and say, let's prove that this isn't just about market share. Now, have to bore everyone with a little bit of sort of how the basically the cake is made in the kitchen. This is a relative scoring, and there are things called anchor points, meaning the highest vendor, the lowest, the most to the right, the most to the left. Those are anchor points that are not going to potentially move depending on how you evaluate the criteria. And what I mean by that is Beam is the top anchor point. So when we move around these sliders, and you can see things turn orange now because I took viability and zeroed it out, Veeam doesn't move because we're the top anchor point. Micro Focus does not move because they are the low anchor point. And again, the reason why I mentioned low and high is we're talking about the ability to execute or this y-axis.
So basically, what you're saying is those create the boundary conditions, and everything else is. I mean, when you're playing with ability to execute, so that's the up and down axis. The top and bottom stay the same, and everything else just moves in variation of that. So you could be thinking about it almost like a line as opposed to a grid. Is that how we should take it away?
Yeah, 100%. And when we switch gears next on vision, it's east, west, or right, left, thinking a similar construct. The other thing to decompose before we riff on what did this result tell us is it may sound slightly counterintuitive, but if we decrease the weighting of a very highly weighted criteria, what we're going to see, except for the anchor vendors, to your point, the boundary conditions, are vendors are going to move in the opposite way in which they were ranked. What do I mean by that? So pick any of them. Now, again, this gray here, as I look over my presentation monitor, the gray is where things started at.
Yep.
In this case, the starting up point was viability ranked incredibly high. If a vendor moves up, after we zero down a viability, that means viability was holding them back. It was creating a headwind. The opposite is true. If we zero out viability and a vendor moves down, let's just say like IBM moved down by zeroing out viability. What does that tell us? It tells us Gartner says they think IBM has above average viability in this specific market as a vendor.
Okay, and again, let's reemphasize the fact that because we're looking at an assessment of vendor, of company, and not of individual product, metrics like viability become really interesting because think about it this way: 5 years from now, when you're going to try to restore data from some crisis or whether, do you know whether they're going to still be in business or not? I mean, when we talk about viability, that's what you're talking about, and you could do the same thing for sales execution, right? So will you be able to get a hold of somebody to engage with the product? Do they have global coverage or not? Market responsiveness. Are they adapting to things like ransomware or not? But every one of those measures is a measure of company, not a measure of product. So when you reduce viability as a measure, you're saying, hey, long-term trust in the company doesn't matter, right? If I'm not worried about confidence they're going to be here in 5 years or 10 years, then what does the measure show? And that's where you start to see headwinds. I mean, I'm trying to just dumb this down a little bit, but is that right?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And without naming names, you can see, let the graphics speak for itself. You can see some of the newer entrants where they go up from that grayed out original position. Where if we reduce viability, that means headwinds that were actually holding them down are removed, and they go up. Look just specifically, maybe in the leaders quadrant, you can see a couple vendors that are pretty darn well known, major players for a long time. They go up slightly. Some of the newer vendors, they go up dramatically. So the viability of the newer vendors is more questionable in Gartner's evaluation than some of the long-standing vendors. And you can see a couple of the vendors being, again, an anchor point, but another one doesn't move at all. So it's perceived as being high in its overall viability in the market.
Because they've already proven they're going to be here, right? So, they may need to adapt their feature set in order to stay relevant, but as a company, they're long withstanding. In fact, one of them we used to joke is the industry's largest market donor for years and years and years and years, and their dot doesn't move very much because they're probably still going to be donating share 5 years from now.
Yeah, well said. So let's apply the same kind of logic, if we will. I'm just going to hit a few extra sliders, but we're going to look at the vision or the x-axis this
Mhm.
time. Okay, so what we see here now, again, the reason it's orange is because it's changed. The gray that you see are the original dot or placement positions of the vendors. And then if you look at completeness of vision, the things that I changed are in orange. What was
Okay.
changed is everything that's in orange went from medium weighting to the highest weighting. And so what that proves to us, and I'll admit this is a bit of a Veeam brag, this is showing is that if we ranked higher areas where Veeam was rated higher by Gartner, meaning market strategy, sales strategy, business model, our geographic strategy. Geographic strategy, Jason, 450,000 customers in more than 180 countries, as an example.
Right.
If that's rated low, then our dot doesn't move as much as if it's rated high. Then we move over to the right.
I actually think it's a little bit ironic that things like market strategy and sales strategy and geography, I mean, those are the things that actually arguably power our ability to execute, right? How many countries we do business in, how diverse our marketing strategy is, how distributed and channels centric we are. I mean, that's how we got to the ability to execute. I mean, forget how Gartner puts all the sliders in. That's why we're as prevalent as we are, is because of sales and marketing and geographic split and our dependency on channel.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, there is a philosophical difference. And, when I was the lead author, my view was there was sort of this compression of vendors, meaning, in 2005, when I started at Gartner and someone called up and said, here are the four things I need from a backup product. and there was a 30-minute conversation typically, and I would say, well, this is going to be fast because there's only two vendors that can meet your requirement. You fast forward to 2018, and someone says, well, Jason, hey, can you list the vendors that I should consider if I want to back up 100 VMs, but I also have physical Windows and Linux? I'm like, well, we only have 29 more minutes. There are many vendors that could do that. So, one viewpoint that was held, prior to sort of analyst shifting in the Magic Quadrant, who was the lead analyst, was that business innovation was just as important as product or technical innovation. And now in the assessment of Gartner, they're overweighting towards technical innovation. And there's no right or wrong answer. That's exactly why I point out to people, again, you have to be a Gartner seat holder, which is justified, in my mind, but look beyond the graphic. And
Right.
if you are a Gartner seat holder, go and move these sliders around for criteria that are most important to you.
Yeah, so I never had Gartner on my on my business cards, but I was an analyst at another firm for a couple years. And one of the things that I used to try to explain when I was being asked also, what product do you pick, was I talked about the fact that that all the other vendors, say 6, 7 years ago, they all claimed this heterogeneous. We can back up everything within the data center. The cloud wasn't really a thing yet, but they didn't back up VMs well. And so they were all trying to figure out how to back up VMs well in order to catch up to Veeam. Veeam, on the other hand, same time frame, backed up VMs really, really well, and they were adding at that point physical agents and storage agents, et cetera. And the argument was at some point everything was going to be heterogeneous. It's about the rest of the business and the delivery that was really going to matter over time. And I think that's what you see here is that heterogeneity is not the de facto what should make a difference in the pricing. So yes, if you have a Gartner seat, this should help you figure out, okay, what matters to you, right? Move those slides around, because it's not, can you back up VMs well? Yes, we back them up better than anybody else, but these sliders can make a real difference in what matters to you.
Yeah, and towards that end, now if we get, I'll say a combination, let's get into Veeam specifics,
Yep.
but let's also point out to everyone, this is how the rest of the document, meaning beyond just the graphic we see here, is comprised. And so what Gartner does, and this you can click on our URL, vee.am/MQ22. We'll give it to you again with the QR code when we wrap up, but you can click on that and go from our Veeam site, check out this document, and read this on every single vendor. And so, Jason, Gartner, in my opinion, does a very even job about having this very similar amount of text for every vendor, short and concise, as you could see here, this one paragraph. And then to help organizations select what might be the best product for them, they list 3 strengths and then 3 cautions. Now, some of these strengths may not be applicable to you, so fine, look for ones that are, if they're listed. Same with the cautions, that might be very applicable to you or not applicable to you. So in the interest of real estate, I just broke this into 2 slides because I couldn't fit it in without shrinking the print too much. But here's the text. And the text basically says, Veeam clients tend to be enterprise and mid-market. In the last 12 months, released 30 products. And they also comment on our partner ecosystem. So I just put out 3 bullets here. From a business perspective, here are some key takeaways. From a product perspective, what you get from the strengths areas in the text as well is pandemic year, 2 years in a row, we're releasing dozens and dozens of products, 2020, 2021, and now into 2022. Broad platform support, which gets mentioned here, workload and platform support. And very strong on Kubernetes because, Jason, we made an acquisition. Veeam does not make acquisitions often, but 2020, towards the end of the year, we made an acquisition in Caston to have what we believe is best of breed Kubernetes support and been integrating that into our platform. And then one of the things I always like to harp on, and I know I've heard you say it too, is Veeam is, in my mind, very unique because we can take the same product, the exact same ISO image, we can go down market, we can go to edge locations,
Yep.
We can go to the largest banks with one instance of Veeam and scale that solution.
Yeah, I've joked for years with folks. I carry an iPhone, right? And so once a year, usually in the fall, you get to choose small, medium, or large. That's all you get, right? As opposed to my desktop that I actually do business on is Windows, right? How much storage, how much memory, and what kind of screen, what kind of form factor. I need that to fit my particular goals, and those 4 or 5 performance vectors don't always change. I love the fact that as an unapologetic software defined solution. The same thing fits with the same level of reliability and the same level of user experience, whether you are an SMB, whether you are a robo, or whether you are a large enterprise. All the buttons work exactly the same way and deliver enterprise capabilities regardless of how big or small your environment is. I could not be prouder of the fact that that's what Gartner saw as well.
Yep, I agree. I think it's a great point. What you experience in your home lab is going to be exactly the same that a major bank in Europe is protecting 20,000 machines, 8 petabytes of data with one instance of Veeam. But let's be fair here. Gartner also highlighted 3 cautions, and again, they highlight 3 cautions for every vendor.
Yep.
I'll be a little bit of an apologist because obviously every vendor is going to say why they think the caution is not as concerning as maybe, is written. But I'll give you kind of first word on this, on the first one, meaning as a service, they're highlighting reliance on partners because I think you mentioned earlier in the live stream, Veeam goes to market exclusively with partners.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm probably biased on this one because I grew up in the channel. I grew up as a partner guy before I was ever a vendor guy. And what I learned back then is that when we talk about things like BAS and DRAS, when you talk about service provider, everyone seems to focus on the P of providers. Like, hey, I'm going to go stand up a cloud someplace, my cloud, somebody else's cloud, whatever. What really matters to be successful, especially in DRAS, is not the provider, not the secondary cloudy infrastructure. It's the expertise, right? So I am a certified business continuity planner from one of my last lives, right? And you probably can't afford one of those on your full-time staff, but a DRAS provider can. And so, really, if you're going to be in BAS and DRAS and be successful, you want smarter humans than you watching that pane of glass. You want BCDR experts that you can't afford on staff to be there when you need them and just be paying for the storage when you don't. So, honestly, I'm pretty darn proud of reliance on partners. I think that's the right way to be successful in cloud powered data protection.
Yeah, one thing I will point out, because we know the revenue models, Veeam makes more money off of our partner ecosystem around BAS and DRAS than some of the vendors do in their entire portfolio that are listed in the Magic Quadrant. So we feel it's a successful model. If I hit the other two very quickly, there's a complexity statement where it says some Gartner customers inquiry indicate Veeam can become more complex to manage at scale. And then there's a notion of secure by implementation, meaning to get the hardened ransomware capabilities, you have to deploy it in the correct manner. I will tell you, and this is a commercial or tease, to go download the whole report. Variations on these exact same cautions are listed for at least a couple of other vendors, including vendors that are in the leaders quadrant as well. So some of this, yes, because of the flexibility, you've got to go and tune it just right. I would just assert we are the most used product in the industry with over 1 million downloads, which includes our no charge free offerings, but we have very credible, capable, powerful no charge offerings. And at 450,000 customers, we are just probably about more deployed than all of the other vendors in the leaders quadrant combined. So if there really were dramatic complexity issues, and we are, to Gartner's point, heavily penetrating the enterprise, in fact, over 52% now, 53% of our revenue is derived from the enterprise segment, I think that would have, altered our business results.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I would think about is when I see complexity and I think implementation, I think there's an interest in stacks, right? The hardware and the software coming together. And my thinking is if I'm an all Cisco UCS environment, do I really want to introduce an Intel white box or a super micro box where I have different patching schedules, different management schedules, different firmware? I'm not sure that's entirely a more secure implementation, but I kind of get the wonder unicorn vision of, oh, look, it's a black box with blinky lights. Surely it's more lockdownable. So I get it.
So as we wrap up, just want to point, in fact, I'm going to click back because I love that great QR code that you created, Jason. There we go. So click on either the QR code or the URL, download the report. Again, you owe it to yourself to get educated. We're not saying Veeam is the perfect product for everyone. Obviously, we think it can handle a lot of needs, but find out for yourself. And now, as we wrap up, our buddies coming up next week on this Friday, this week on this Friday, Rick Vanover, Kirsten Stoner, they're going to talk about Veeam storage, how it's come a long way over the years, and that Veeam repository technologies such as our scale-out backup repository, our Veeam hardened Linux repository, and our upcoming direct-to-object capabilities might be able to handle many of your needs and concerns as well. So be sure to check that out. As always, thanks for tuning in. Go check out the Gartner Magic Quadrant report and make an informed decision. Stay safe, stay positive, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye now.